Hey guys, we're taking our time tonight. The world outside has already slowed down. Yellow squares are fading in the windows of high-rise buildings. Someone will still be flipping through the tape. Someone will be late for the last tram. And you are already lying down, feeling your body slowly becoming heavy. Silence and the echo of the day are mixed in the air, and it is time to surrender to philosophy that sounds like a lullaby, but let's be honest, you would probably never last. A whole night alone with your thoughts without any distraction. A person would simply crumble under the weight of their own ideas. That is why we are looking for the words of Plato, Seneca, or Buddha. They become soft pillows for the mind. So, before you settle down, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really like what I am doing here. And I will be glad if you write in the comments where exactly you are listening to me now and what time it is. This will create our own night map of the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for a quiet background hum, and let's dive into today's journey together. Your night begins not with urgency, but with surrender. You've been dragging your shoulders through emails, chores, and conversations all day, and now the universe is politely asking you to put everything down. The city outside may still sparkle like it's auditioning for a Broadway musical, but inside, the rhythm has slowed. Your chest rises and falls in sync with something ancient. You're breathing like people once did when there were no clocks, no notifications, only the sound of wind through branches and the occasional owl with very questionable timing. There's a strange kind of comfort in imagining that. No glowing screens, no silent pressure to answer in blue or green text bubbles. Just bodies that knew when to rest because the sun told them so. You can almost picture yourself sitting by a fire, rubbing your hands together, knowing the world would forgive you for doing absolutely nothing until dawn. You wouldn't even have to justify it with a mental health day. The rhythm of slowing down isn't just poetic, it's biological. Your body has its own clock, the circadian rhythm, a phrase that sounds like the name of a mediocre indie band, but is in fact the reason why you're getting sleepy right now. Thousands of years before wristwatches, ancient Egyptians noticed this pattern of waking and resting. They even built shadow clocks to track hours, though honestly, most of us still lose track of time even with a smartphone strapped to our hand. Historians still argue whether sundials were ever accurate enough to avoid being late for dinner. And while we don't rely on shadow clocks anymore, your inner body still works like that steady, quiet, repetitive. You, lying there now, are sensing back up to something more faithful than any alarm app. There's a smell of your day still lingering, coffee, subway metal, maybe detergent on your shirt, and it mixes with the darker tones of night air. This blend is proof that the world doesn't switch off like a light. It drifts, and you drift with it. The art of slowing down begins with permission. Permission to not be brilliant, not be fast, not even be particularly coherent. In this half-lit moment, the bar is set low, and that's exactly where it should be. Take your feet, for example. They've been loyal pack animals all day, hauling you from place to place without once demanding a holiday in Spain. And yet, when you finally slide them under the blanket, they exhale like teenagers thrown onto a couch after chores. You don't usually think about this small rebellion, but it's happening. Every tendon is sighing, every nerve is loosening its grip. This is what Wu Wei, the Chinese idea of effortless action, feels like in your own muscles. You aren't forcing them to relax, you're just letting them do what they were begging to do anyway. The funny part is, civilizations have always known this. The Romans bathed not only for hygiene, but because they considered leisure almost a civic duty. Public baths were like today's coffee shops, except instead of Wi-Fi, you got heated marble and the faint possibility of political gossip. Some emperors even funded them just to look generous. Imagine your mayor opening a free spa and calling it democracy. You'd vote twice. The point is, the rhythm of slowing down was once built into public life. Now, we often treat relaxation like an illegal substance. You whisper about naps at work the way someone might whisper about smuggling contraband. Did you close your eyes at your desk? No, I was just thinking really hard with my eyelids. But right now, you don't need an excuse. The night accepts you exactly as you are, eyelids drooping, phone face down, brain half convinced that you should learn Portuguese someday. You're safe from the tyranny of to-do. Listen closer. There's probably a fridge humming in the background, a motor that sounds almost like a low chant. Or maybe it's your fan, spinning circles in the dark, creating artificial wind, just so you don't have to open the window. The sound is boring, and that's good. The boring things cradle you. They are the quiet stage hands of your bedtime play. Here's a quirky detail. Some medieval monasteries believed in the Great Silence, a period after dusk, when nobody was allowed to talk. Imagine that, an entire building of humans voluntarily shutting up. Hard to picture now, when even your neighbor's parrot has a TikTok account. But monks recognized what you're starting to sense. Silence isn't empty, it's loaded with texture, like velvet for your ears. So as you lie there, your silence is filling with shapes. The ticking radiator, the faint shuffle of someone to floors up, maybe even the buzz of a moth who hasn't figured out that your lamp is not the entrance to heaven. These small sounds sketch the borders of your night. They don't ask you to solve anything, they just want you to notice. And here's the first small joke of the night. You know your body is truly relaxing when you start to hear the sounds of your apartment and think, this could be ASMR. Suddenly, the dripping tap is a spa soundtrack, the creak of the floorboard is a rustic charm, and the neighbor slamming the door is okay. That one is still annoying, but even annoyance fades faster at night. You're cocooned in heaviness, eyes blinking slower, the weight of blankets pressing you like a polite but insistent cat. You are no longer in charge of the tempo. That's the gift. The world outside can still scroll, refresh, repeat, but you, here, are not scrolling. You are surrendering. The overture of the evening is complete. Your stage is set for drifting deeper. Every inhale is longer than the last. Every exhale sounds like the closing argument in a trial against busyness. And yes, you're winning that trial. The river always flows, whether you're watching or not. Right now, in the middle of the night, you're lying still, but the water of life is still trickling, gurgling, curling around rocks you don't see. The paradox, by not splashing against it, you suddenly begin to float, and floating feels suspiciously like rest. You've heard this metaphor before, of course. Life is a river, blah blah, Instagram quote on a stock photo background with too much saturation. But let's stretch it beyond the cliché. Rivers have been teachers far longer than social media influencers. The Taoist sages looked at them not as scenery, but as mentors. They noticed that water doesn't insist on straight lines. It bends, twists, takes detours. It's shamelessly lazy about speed, yet it always reaches the sea. There's a historical curiosity here. In ancient China, canals weren't just for irrigation. They were spiritual metaphors. One old text describes rulers as riverbanks do, rigid, and the water would burst through. To loose, and the water would wander uselessly. Your own life is like that, too rigid, and you break. To loose, and you drift into Netflix binges until your screen asks, are you still watching? Historians still argue whether the Tao Te Ching was really written by one sage or stitched together by generations of water watchers. But either way, its obsession with flow stuck. You may have noticed this flow in your own body when you fight against sleep, scrolling, worrying, rearranging your blanket like you're auditioning for a role in a furniture commercial. You stay awake longer. But when you stop demanding, you slip under. You become like the leaf in the river, no engine, no map, but you're moving anyway. Here's another odd fact to float alongside. In ancient Rome, aqueducts were engineered with such a gentle slope that the water sometimes traveled miles with only a whisper of decline. The builders knew that forcing it to steep would cause chaos, but guiding it slowly kept the stream alive. You're the aqueduct tonight, Tilt just enough, don't shove, don't collapse. Just let gravity do its job. And if you need a laugh, picture yourself literally trying to argue with a river. Excuse me, can you please hurry? I have goals. The river doesn't care. It will keep flowing long after your to-do list is outdated. The joke's on us. Rivers have more patience than humans ever will. And they don't even know what patience is. Still, you can feel the echo of their lesson in your day. Think about traffic lights. You wait, foot hovering on the brake, growing impatient. And then the light changes, and the cars surge forward as if released from captivity. But all along, the road was still there. The world didn't actually stop. Flow was happening, you just weren't part of it. This is the secret. You are allowed to step out and rejoin at will. The river doesn't demand attendance. It doesn't fine you for missing a bend. You get to float again whenever you remember. How? Tonight is practice. The river image is also surprisingly democratic. It doesn't matter if you're a king or a janitor, you still get wet the same way when you fall in. Some medieval peasants bathed in rivers, not out of choice, but necessity, scrubbing away dust from work in fields, and yes, sometimes they used sand instead of soap, which must have felt like exfoliation, designed by your worst enemy. Still, it worked. It was cheap, efficient, and unintentionally spiritual. Flow purified them, and now, lying there, your own flow is slower, but just as cleansing. Blood moving through veins, oxygen swapping with carbon dioxide, breath expanding and contracting like miniature tides. You're an estuary in pajamas. It's funny how we try to control this flow. We count steps, measure calories, time our productivity. With apps, it's like installing traffic lights on the Amazon River. The water doesn't need your help. And neither do you. Not really. Not tonight. Instead, notice how stillness and flow merge. It's not contradiction. It's choreography. The river isn't just moving forward, it's also holding itself together in every curve. You, too, are holding and moving at once. Your chest rises, that's the tide in. Your chest falls, that's the tide out. Congratulations, you've become a coastal ecosystem. Historians point out that Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher, claimed you can't step into the same river twice, mostly because the water keeps moving, but also because you keep changing. The version of you lying here now is not the version that began listening 5 minutes ago. You're softer, heavier, possibly already thinking about snacks. So what do you do with this wisdom? Not much. That's the point. Way effortless action means trusting the river to take you somewhere without steering like a maniac. It's learning that survival doesn't always mean splashing and flailing. Sometimes it means surrendering to a current you don't fully understand. There's humor here too. Humans invented kayaks, canoes, jet skis, all these tools to dominate the river. But every summer, without fail, someone tips over and ends up laughing or cursing in waist-deep water, dragged along by the same force they thought they controlled. The river always gets the last laugh. Tonight, the river is carrying you without wetting your socks. It's invisible, but you feel it. A pulse under your blanket, a drift in your eyelids. The sensation that tomorrow can arrive on its own without your micromanagement. You're not here to outswim anyone. You're here to notice the current. And if you let it, it will carry you softly towards sleep, the sea where everyone eventually merges. The river always flows. You don't have to. Weigh in your skin. This is where the philosophy stops being a clever metaphor and becomes something your body already knows how to do. You don't have to read Laozi or carry a bamboo flute through the mountains to get it. You've been practicing, non-forcing all your life, sometimes without realizing it. Like right now, lying there, letting the blanket fall exactly where it wants to, not fighting with the folds as if they're out to ruin your evening. That, in miniature, is Wu Wei. It's easy to think of non-action as laziness, as if Taoists were justifying napping as a spiritual practice, and honestly, maybe they were. But Wu Wei isn't about doing nothing, it's about doing what happens naturally. You breathe in, you breathe out. You don't draft a business plan for inhaling. You don't give a PowerPoint presentation to your lungs. They just do it. And if you ever try to interfere, like when you consciously tell yourself, okay, now I'm breathing, you suddenly feel clumsy, as though you've forgotten how to operate the very body you live in. There's a charming fact from history. Here, during the Han Dynasty in China, some scholars practiced sitting in forgetfulness, a meditative exercise where you literally sat until your body seemed to dissolve into the air. One described it as the bones disappearing, the flesh melting, only the Tao remaining. Sounds a bit like being a ghost in training, but it was their way of tuning into effortless being. Historians still argue whether these were practical health exercises or just poetic exaggerations, but the idea was clear. Stop forcing, start allowing. Wu Wei is already happening in you. Your heartbeat is a stubborn example. Try controlling it. You can sprint, you can meditate, you can caffeinate it into jazz rhythms, but you can't sit there micromanaging each beat. It's autopilot, and you're the passenger. Imagine if you did have to manage it, half the world would be late to work because someone forgot to keep their heart running while scrolling Twitter. This effortless action also sneaks into daily life more often than you notice. Think of playing an instrument. At first you force it, fingers stiff, brain overworked, sounds resembling a dying animal more than a melody. But once your hands know the strings or keys, something happens. The music plays through you. You don't wrestle the notes, they fall out naturally, and you're surprised you're even the one doing it. That's Wu Wei, mastery disguised as surrender, or walking. Yes, even walking. You don't calculate angles and pressure before every step. Your body, with its ridiculously complex network of muscles, tendons, and nerves, just balances you. You only realize how much Wu Wei was happening when you trip on the sidewalk and suddenly remember how fragile the whole enterprise is. The humor here is obvious. Humans are desperate to complicate what already works. We invent productivity systems to optimize breathing, apps to track how many hours we spend relaxing, and bookshelves sagging under how to stop forcing life. And yet the joke is, every toddler has mastered Wu Wei. They stumble, eat, nap, repeat, while adults pay money for retreats to rediscover the same rhythm. There's also an awkward truth. Forcing doesn't actually help. When you try to hard to sleep, you stay awake. When you grip too hard in conversation, the other person stiffens. Even plants resist overwatering. Your houseplant is more Taoist than you. It quietly thrives when you forget about it for a week. The Japanese practice of shibui, understated beauty, echoes this. A bowl with an even glaze is valued because its floor proves it wasn't overworked. In other words, the craftsman allowed the bowl to simply become what it was becoming. If you had been in that workshop, you might have panicked, grabbed a brush, and ruined the charm by fixing it. Wu Wei is knowing when to leave the bowl, the conversation, or even your own life alone. Imagine now that your body is like a riverbank, and your breath is the current slipping past. You don't dig channels with a shovel. You don't dam it up. You don't hire consultants to redesign it. You let it slide past your ribs, in and out, like the ocean tide politely visiting your chest. Each time you notice, you realize you've been practicing non-forcing all along. And here's the playful side. Sometimes effortless living is mistaken for rebellion. Picture a medieval monk who was supposed to copy manuscripts all night, but instead let his candle burn out early and took a nap. Was that laziness? Or was that Wu Wei disguised as common sense? The records don't tell us, but we do know scribes often doodled in the Mojon's tiny animals, jokes, even caricatures of their bosses. That was Wu Wei too. Creativity slipping out where no one forced it. So as you lie there, your blanket molding to you without complaint, you feel Wu Wei in your skin, not just as philosophy, but as practice, the weight of your body against the mattress, the heaviness of eyelids resisting your effort to keep them open. Even now, you might be fighting a yawn, because your biology is Taoist and your mind hasn't caught up yet. Remember, you don't have to conquer rest, You just have to stop resisting it. That's the way effortless action humming in your veins, reminding you that surrender is not defeat. It's the secret rhythm of being alive. The Stoics at your bedside, they arrive without ceremony. No sandals creaking across marble floors, no scrolls fluttering in their sleeves. Just a soft hush of an old idea settling into your pillow. Amor fati, love your fate. And before you panic, no, this doesn't mean you have to love your neighbor's dog that barks at 3 a.m. or that email chain you regret opening. It's subtler. It's about learning to look at even the small absurdities of your day, the sock that vanished, the soup that boiled over, and see them not as sabotage, but as part of the script you didn't write. The Romans were serious about this. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor philosopher, kept a private journal where he basically lectured himself to stop whining. He wrote that every irritation was an opportunity to practice acceptance. Imagine the ruler of half the known world telling himself, yes, the Senate is plotting again, but this too belongs to the fabric of life. You have to admire the self-control. Most of us can't even accept it when our phone autocorrects love into live for the 50th time. There's a quirky story from history that fits here. Epictetus, a Stoic teacher, was once a slave. His master twisted his leg so badly it broke. Instead of screaming, Epictetus calmly said, "I told you it would break." That wasn't sarcasm. It was philosophy embodied. He didn't celebrate pain, but he accepted it as something that simply belonged to the flow of his life. Historians still debate whether his composure was bravery or an unusually dry sense of humor. So here you are tonight, not in a Roman forum but in bed, faced with your own small trials, the blanket that suddenly feels too heavy, the memory of an awkward comment replaying in your head, or the distant sound of a neighbor binge-watching something with explosions. Amor fati whispers, it all belongs. You don't have to like it, but you can love it the way you love freckles or the chipped rim of your favorite mug. The flaw is not outside the design. The flaw is the design. This is where Stoicism and Taoism shake hands in the dark. Wu Wei says, stop forcing. Amor fati says, stop resisting. Both invite you to relax your grip. Picture a Stoic sitting at the edge of your mattress, robes tucked around his knees, saying, yes, the universe put you in these mismatched socks. So clearly mismatched socks were meant to be. You laugh, but the wisdom is there. It's not that the Stoics wanted you to be passive. They believed in action, but action aligned with reality, not against it. If it rains, don't curse the clouds, bring an umbrella. Or don't just get wet and love the wetness. Tonight, if your mind insists on throwing in random thoughts, don't wrestle them. Let them drift by like badly cast extras in your dream sequence. They're not worth firing. Here's a small joke for you. If Marcus Aurelius had Twitter, his feed would be unreadably calm. No rants, no hashtags, just lines like got insulted again today. Accepted it. #fate. And yet millions would follow him for his minimalism. Even the texture of your room right now can become a lesson in amor fati. The ticking clock. It belongs. The uneven pillow. It belongs. The way your body feels heavier on one side. That belongs. 2. You don't need to arrange perfection before sleep. You need only to lean into what's already here. Think of history's bedrooms. Kings slept in drafty castles, monks on straw mats, peasants on sacks stuffed with hay that probably squeaked with every turn. None of them had orthopedic mattresses, yet they slept, and life went on. You, with your sheets and thermostat, have already won the comfort lottery. And still the mind resists. But what about tomorrow's meeting? Amor fati again. Tomorrow's meeting already exists. You can't evict it from your fate. Might as well tuck it in with you and let it snore in the corner. So as you drift deeper into stillness, let the Stoics sit quietly with you. They don't shout. They don't demand. They murmur. This is the life you've been given, not the one on a Pinterest board, not the one you rehearsed in your head, but this one. The creaks, the interruptions, the awkwardness, even the beauty. And if you can learn to not just accept, but love it, mismatched socks and all you've already touched. The Art of Effortless Living. The kingdom of slowness is open tonight, and you've already crossed its border without a passport. No guards, no paperwork, just the invisible permission slip that comes when you stop hurrying. The funny thing about slowness is that it has always been there, waiting patiently, while you were out sprinting toward deadlines like a contestant on a game show. No one is actually watching. Imagine an ancient garden pavilions, still ponds, bamboo whispering when the wind leans in. This wasn't designed for rushing. In classical China and Japan, gardens were built not to be conquered, but wandered. Each path curved on purpose, so you'd have to slow down to see what was around the bend. If you tried to march through quickly, you'd miss half of it, maybe walk straight into a pine tree. Slowness was the architecture. Historians still argue whether these designs were more spiritual or political, but either way, they slowed people down better than a Netflix loading screen. The same lesson hides in modern kitchens. Think of simmering soup, try to rush it, and you burn the bottom, your pot turning into an archaeological exhibit for carbon. But give it time, slow bubbles, steady steam, and the flavor deepens. Even your grandmother would agree. Haste makes waste, but slow cooking makes taste. You see, the kingdom of slowness isn't about never moving. It's about refusing to treat life like a race with a medal ceremony at the end. And yet, we do. We schedule workouts to be faster, meals to be shorter, even relaxation to be efficient. We've industrialized leisure. It's like forcing a hammock to meet productivity goals. Here's a quirky note. In the Middle Ages, time wasn't counted in minutes. Villagers measured it by bells or the length of a prayer. A paternoster might be a unit of cooking, like boil this egg, for 2 prayers. Imagine living without timers, just whispering a prayer and hoping your egg didn't explode. Clocks only became common much later, and when they did, people suddenly felt late for everything. We invented punctuality and then became enslaved to it, and yet, even cities, with their glass towers and subways, secretly breathe slower than we think. Trains might rattle like they're competing in a drag race, but every evening, stations fall quiet. Elevators stop humming, offices dim, the towers rest like giant animals, curling into themselves. You might not see it when you're rushing between platforms, but the city has its own bedtime story, told in neon yawns. You, too, can hear it when you stop chasing. The whir of your fridge, the occasional car sighing down the street. It's the metropolis reminding you, slowness is not absence, it's present stretched thin enough to notice. Now, what happens when you join this kingdom? At first, it feels wrong. You itch for speed, like a phantom limb. But slowly, your body remembers. Your pulse drops, your muscles unclench, and you realize how much of your day was wasted on rushing that led nowhere faster. The paradox is almost comic. Hurry less, arrive better. Even snails, those accidental mascots of slowness, carry wisdom. A Roman poet once joked about them being dinner and metaphor all in one. But think of it, a creature that carries its home, moves at a fraction of your speed, and still survives centuries of human mockery. And in Japan, children still race snails for fun, cheering their slimy heroes like Olympic athletes. Slow living, it turns out, can still be entertaining. So tonight, lying in your own quiet corner of the kingdom, you can feel it. The long inhale, the longer exhale, the refusal of your heart to rush just because the clock says it's late. You've joined the company of gardeners, monks, and maybe even a snail or two. You're in no hurry, and that is the whole point. A snail's secret wisdom. You might laugh at the idea, but don't dismiss it too quickly. Nature often hides its most patient sermons in the smallest, slimmiest creatures. Somewhere in the garden of your memory, you've seen one, a snail dragging its soft body across the sidewalk like an old philosopher with a portable library on its back. The world rushes by dogs, bicycles, children shouting, but the snail insists on its private tempo, refusing to update its speed for any one dot in ancient symbolism. Snails were sometimes linked to the moon. Why? Because they disappear and reappear with the weather, just like lunar phases. Farmers notice snails after rain, glistening trails etched across stones like cryptic handwriting. Even Roman naturalists wrote about these trails, puzzled at how such fragile creatures could leave behind something so durable. And here's the odd fact: snail slime, that glossy ribbon you've probably cursed when stepping barefoot outside, has been studied for centuries for its supposed healing powers. In Renaissance apothecaries, snail mucus was sold as a cure for coughs and burns. Historians still argue whether this was science or medieval placebo, but the belief persisted, proving that even goo can carry prestige. Now think about what that means metaphorically. The snail doesn't just move, it leaves a mark. Its path might look random, but in the morning light, you can trace exactly where it's been. You, too, leave invisible trails, gestures, words, impressions. You're not sprinting through life, but every step, slow as it may be, paints something behind you. Humans often despise slowness. We invent microwaves, bullet trains, express checkouts, as though speed itself were salvation. But the snail mocks us gently. It has survived ice ages, extinctions, empires collapsing. Your calendar app will not. Here's a quirky thought: snails are technically hermaphrodites. Each one is both male and female, which means they rarely worrying about finding the perfect partner. Efficiency disguised as biology. Imagine how much less stress you'd have if romance worked that way. No endless swiping. No dating profiles, just a quiet meeting in the garden, some slime, and done. But back to philosophy. When you lie still, at night, wrapped in sheets, aren't you a little snail yourself? Your blanket becomes the shell, heavy, but protective. You carry it wherever you roll. The room feels oversized, but you inch through it in imagination, slow, unhurried, without pressure to conquer anything. You're not rushing into tomorrow. You're just here, leaving the faintest trace of existence, your breath fogging the night air, your pulse marking time. Even artists have been fascinated by this creature. In medieval manuscripts, snails often appeared as strange illustrations in the margins, sometimes fighting knights. Scholars joke about it now. Why on earth were monks doodling snails battling armored men? Some say it symbolized humility defeating pride. Others think it was simply comic relief, a reminder not to take the serious text too seriously. Imagine being a scribe, bored out of your mind, and deciding that a snail dueling a knight would spice things up. That's way too effortless. Play slipping out when duty got to heavy dot, and here's your joke of the night. If life ever feels unbearable, remember that snails can sleep for up to 3 years. Not metaphorically, literally. When conditions are tough, they seal themselves into their shells and wait it out. 3 years of nap mode. You complain about Mondays. Snails skip entire presidential terms. What can you borrow from them? Not the slime, please don't try that, but the patience. The quiet refusal to sprint when there's no need. The resilience in carrying a home everywhere you go. And the permission to retreat when the weather is harsh. So, as you settle deeper into your pillow, think of yourself as a snail gliding through darkness. Every breath is a glistening trail, every exhale proof that you've moved a little farther even in stillness. Your wisdom isn't in speed tonight. It's in leaving something delicate behind, invisible to most, but shimmering for anyone who looks closely. Cities breathing slower, you might not notice it in daylight, when traffic growls and screens scream. But even concrete jungles have lungs. Tonight, if you listen carefully, you'll hear them. The skyscrapers aren't roaring anymore, they're dozing. Neon signs still buzz, but softer, as if yawning in colors. And subway tunnels, those nervous arteries of the city, are empty. echoing with silence, so thick it feels like velvet stretched underground. It's easy to think of cities as relentless machines that never stop, but history proves otherwise. Medieval towns shut down with the sun. After curfew bells, streets went black, save for the flicker of tallow candles. People believed ghosts walked at night, so rushing out after dark was risky, not because of crime, but because you might bump into a wandering soul. Historians still argue whether these fears were superstition or clever social control, but either way, towns slowed to a crawl. You could hear your own heartbeat in the alleys. Fast forward to modern times, and even the busiest metropolises have their lullabies. Think of New York's subway system, nearly 5 million rides a day, yet between 2 and 4 a.m., trains run like ghosts, sparse, quiet, with only a few night workers or half-asleep wanderers. The city inhales less during those hours, exhaling gently through steam vents, not roars. You lying here, you're in rhythm with that breathing. Your body is syncing with a larger organism, whether you admit it or not. The fridge hums, the fan spins, and outside, entire districts exhale, dropping shoulders built of steel and glass. Even restless places know rest. Here's a quirky fact. In 19th century Paris, gas lamps were installed across boulevards. People feared this would banish night forever, erasing its mystery. But the opposite happened. Citizens began strolling, slowly, treating lamplit nights as invitations to linger. Paris earned the title City of Light, but what it really invented was slow nightlife. Instead of rushing, people wandered, letting light soften their pace. Cities are like that. They can't sprint 24/7. Elevators stall for maintenance. Bakeries pause between batches. Office windows turn black. Even the Wi-Fi seems slower at night, as though the satellites are politely asking you to rest. And here's your small joke. If cities had a Fitbit, they'd be embarrassed at night. Only 200 steps between 1 and 3 a.m. Lazy. But that's the wisdom. Slowness is not laziness, it's recovery. The pause before the next surge. You might remember earlier, the snail leaving its trail. Now picture that trail stretching through the city. Delivery bikes, buses, footsteps, all leaving invisible ribbons on the streets. By midnight, the ribbons thin. By 2 a.m., they nearly vanish. That's when you realize, even the busy systems know when to loosen the grip. Tonight, as you sink deeper into stillness, imagine your body as one small district of this vast city. Your heartbeat is the streetlight. Your breath is the quiet train gliding underground. Each cell is an apartment, light flicking off one by one. And just like that, the metropolis of you is breathing slower too. Work without pushing. This is where life begins to feel like a dance instead of a punishment. Not a sweaty nightclub frenzy, not TikTok choreography, but something quieter, steadier, almost invisible. You've probably had those rare days when work just moved, tasks folded into each other, hands seemed to know where to go, time disappeared. That's the rhythm philosophers meant when they spoke of effortless action. Wu Wei doesn't mean idleness, it means mastery so natural it looks like ease. Think of calligraphers in ancient China, their brushes sweeping characters across paper, like wine drawing lines on water. Beginners forced every stroke, stiff as broom handles, but masters, they didn't draw characters, they released them. Each flick of the wrist was both deliberate and surrendered. The paper carried the memory of their flow. Historians still argue whether calligraphy was more art or meditation, but to the calligrapher, the question was probably irrelevant. You've had your own calligraphy moments. Maybe typing an email and suddenly realizing you don't remember writing the last 3 sentences. Maybe cooking and watching onions caramelize themselves as if conspiring with you. Maybe humming along while cleaning and finding the chore finished without resentment. Those are the glimmers of work without pushing. Contrast that with what happens when you force. You slam the keyboard, check the clock every 3 minutes, rewrite the same sentence 10 times until it looks like a ransom note. Or you wash dishes like you're punishing the plate for existing. You know that heaviness, and you also know the absurd relief when, for once, the work feels lighter than expected. Here's a quirky historical tidbit. In medieval guilds, apprentices learned through repetition, often hundreds of times, but the goal wasn't brute memorization. It was making skill flow without thought. A blacksmith didn't wake up and consciously remember every angle of hammering, his body remembered for him. That's why guild members often prayed before work, not for success, but for rhythm. And here's your small joke. Imagine a medieval shoemaker rushing orders like a modern startup. "We're disrupting the sandal industry," he'd cry, while villagers shake their heads because sandals don't want to be disrupted. They want to be stitched properly. Your own modern guild is your desk, your kitchen, your daily list. Tonight, lying here, you're not working, but you can remember that dance. You can recall how sometimes life feels less like a factory and more like jazz. Improvisation with just enough structure to hold it together. Notice how your breath works. Right now, inhale, exhale, never rushed, never lazy. If you force it, you get dizzy. If you forget it, your body remembers anyway. Work should imitate breath, steady, constant, self-adjusting. That's the blueprint of Wu Wei in labor. The secret is to trade the whip for rhythm. Horses run farther when they're guided, not beaten. And your mind, like a horse, balks when forced. But give it rhythm, turning routine into something predictable, almost musical, and suddenly, the miles disappear underfoot. So, the next time you think of work, don't imagine battle. Imagine dancing with your own hands, stepping into rhythm, instead of dragging against it. Even folding laundry could be choreography if you let it. And if you refuse, well, laundry becomes war. And the socks always win. Tonight, though, you're excused from all that. You're already practicing effortless labor by doing nothing, letting your body's rhythms keep the night alive. Work without pushing begins here, in the weight of your chest rising and falling without complaint. Food as philosophy. You might think it's just dinner, but the way you chew says more about your soul than 100 essays. Tonight, as you lie here, stomach quiet, or maybe still whispering about that late snack, you're closer to wisdom than you think, because eating has always been one of the most human ways of practicing slowness. Picture a monk in an old monastery kitchen. He isn't rushing. Every grain of rice is washed with reverence, each slice of vegetable deliberate, as though preparing food were itself a prayer. In Zen traditions, cooks were considered just as important as teachers, because how you eat shapes how you think. If you devour too quickly, you teach your mind impatience. If you savor, you teach your mind gratitude. Historians still argue whether monks elevated food because of scarcity or because of philosophy, but the ritual remains: eat slowly, chew thoroughly, bow to your bowl. Now compare that to modern life. Lunch is wolfed down between meetings, coffee sipped so fast you burn your tongue, then complain about it as if speed wasn't the culprit. We even design food for rushing: energy bars, instant noodles, drive-through windows. It's survival, yes, but it erases the philosophy hidden in a single spoonful. There's a quirky note from history. In 18th century France, slow dining became a fashion. Aristocrats staged elaborate meals that lasted hours, with dozens of tiny courses. It wasn't just gluttony, it was theater. Meals stretched like symphonies, with pauses and crescendos, wine interludes and witty remarks. It's ironic, the same people who overtax peasants also perfected the art of chewing slowly. Hypocrisy, maybe, but also proof that slowness belongs at the table. And here's your small joke. Imagine a medieval farmer inventing the first fast food stand. Bread in a hurry, he'd yell. Villagers would look at him confused, because back then, food was already the day's main event. No one wanted speed. They wanted bread that didn't break their teeth. Think about your own table. Even if it's just a plate balanced on your lap, the ritual is there. The steam rising, the smell drifting, the texture of the first bite. You're not only feeding a stomach, you're feeding your attention. When you chew slower, you realize the absurd miracle that the earth, through an insane chain of rain, soil, sun, and farmers, ended up on your plate in the form of bread. And here's something even stranger. The nervous system is wired, so digestion only works properly in calm. If you rush, if you panic, your body literally shuts down the stomach. That means slow eating isn't moralizing, it's biological survival. You can't cheat the pace. You either slow down, or your body will protest later with gurgles, cramps, and revenge. So tonight, even without food in front of you, you can taste the lesson. Your breath is a meal, your silence is seasoning, and your body, heavy against the mattress, is the banquet hall. You are feeding yourself with stillness. Food is never just calories, it's philosophy disguised as comfort. And the art of effortless living is remembering that every bite, like every moment, can be either rushed and wasted or savored and stretched into eternity. Sleep as resistance. It sounds dramatic, but maybe that's the point. In a world that worships busyness, closing your eyes becomes a quiet rebellion. You've probably noticed how people brag about exhaustion as if it's a trophy. I only slept 4 hours last night. That's not a medal, it's an unpaid bill. Yet cultures keep handing out applause for burnout, like sleep were a vice instead of the foundation holding everything together. Ancient societies understood rest differently. The Romans had a phrase meridiatio, a midday nap, that was socially accepted, even expected. Siesta culture in Spain, still lingering in some towns, is a descendant of that tradition. People once shaped their days around the sun, not the office clock. They worked with rhythms of heat and darkness instead of against them. Historians still argue whether siestas were more about conserving energy in hot climates or about aligning with natural cycles, but the result was the same. Rest was built in, not stolen. Your modern bed, though, sometimes feels like a courtroom. You lie there, guilty, interrogated by the prosecutor in your head. Why aren't you asleep yet? You need to be up in 6 hours. That pressure makes sleep slip away, like a cat refusing to come when called. And yet, when you stop demanding, when you let go, it creeps back, curling softly at your side. That's wu wei again. Sleep arrives when you stop chasing. Here's a quirky note. During the Industrial Revolution, people tried polyphasic sleep schedules, dividing rest into chunks to squeeze more hours out of the day. One popular experiment was the Huberman schedule, 20-minute naps every few hours. Some inventors swore by it, but records also show many collapsed from sheer exhaustion. Humans aren't machines. The body eventually demands its tide. And your small joke for tonight: if capitalism could charge for dreams, we'd all have monthly subscriptions. Unlimited REM for just $9.99 a month. Luckily, your dreamscape is still free, even if slightly chaotic. Random high school reunions mixed with flying goats and half-finished emails. Sleep is not an escape from productivity, it's the highest form of it. During rest, the brain consolidates memory, clears toxins, and repairs cells. Studies even suggest the lymphatic system, the body's cleaning crew, works harder at night than in the day. So when you're lying down, half asleep, you're not wasting time. You're secretly the most productive you've been all day. And here's the resistance. Every time you shut your eyes, you reject the world's obsession with constant motion. You side with the monks who practiced the great silence, with the workers who once demanded Sundays off, with every grandmother who ever scolded, "Go lie down, you'll feel better." They were all philosophers of rest before the term existed. So now, as your blanket presses a little heavier, remember, sleep isn't surrender. It's strategy. It's the quiet protest that says, "I will not run tonight." Your eyelids drop, and in that simple gesture, you've outsmarted the entire system of rush. Ancient laughter echoes. You might not think of philosophers as comedians, but wisdom has always carried a sense of humor. Imagine how unbearable it would be otherwise, a library full of old men frowning at life without cracking a smile. Even Marcus Aurelius, the stone-faced emperor, must have chuckled sometimes, probably not at memes, but at the absurdity of human habits. Humor is part of survival. The Greeks knew this. In Athens, comedies weren't just entertainment, they were civic duty. Whole crowds gathering in open-air theaters, laughing at politicians, neighbors, even the gods themselves. It was democracy with punchlines. Historians still argue whether this was satire as resistance or just collective stress relief. But the point remains, laughing was woven into the fabric of wisdom. And here's a quirky gem. Diogenes, the cynic, used humor as his main weapon. He wandered Athens with a lantern in daylight, claiming to look for an honest man. He lived in a barrel, mocked Alexander the Great to his face, and once interrupted a lecture by eating loudly, just to prove that philosophy didn't need to be so uptight. Students either hated him or secretly admired his audacity. Either way, he made people laugh and think. You've done this too, in your own way. Think about the moment you drop your phone on your face while scrolling in bed. Painful, yes. Humiliating, definitely. But also funny if you let it be. Amor fati says, love even this. Wu says, don't fight the clumsiness. Humor is the bridge between philosophy and survival. Even monks laughed. In Zen stories, teachers sometimes answered profound questions with absurd gestures, a finger raise, a sudden shout, even a kick. Students were startled into laughter, and in that shock, sometimes enlightenment slipped through. Laughter was a crack in the armor of seriousness. And here's your small joke for the night. If Aristotle had a podcast, half the episodes would be about ethics, and the other half would be bloopers of him tripping over his toga. So as you lie here, listening to the hum of your own night, remember that even wisdom wears slippers. Even philosophers spilled their ink, burned their scrolls, forgot their lines, and they laughed, because to live effortlessly means to stop pretending you're perfect. Humor is effortless honesty. It doesn't demand polish. The echoes of that laughter are still around you. They soften the walls, lighten the blanket, remind you that life is too strange to be taken only seriously. And if you let yourself smile in the dark, you're practicing one of the oldest forms of philosophy, joy disguised as a joke. The rhythm of seasons is one of life's oldest teachers. You don't have to be a farmer or a poet to notice it. Just open a window and breathe. The air itself carries lessons, sharp in winter, soft in spring, heavy in summer, crisp in autumn. The world has always moved in cycles, not straight lines, no matter how many calendars we print to convince ourselves otherwise. Think of cherry blossoms in Japan. They bloom for only a week or two each year, a brief snow of petals that draw crowds. From every corner, people sit under the trees with food, sake, and laughter, knowing that by tomorrow, the branches may already be bare. It's not just sightseeing, it's philosophy called mono no aware, the bittersweet awareness of impermanence. Historians still argue whether this phrase means melancholy or appreciation, but either way, it's a gentle acceptance that beauty comes with an expiration date. Contrast that with modern habits. We demand strawberries in December, oranges in June, mangoes flown across oceans. We eat against the rhythm of the earth. Convenient, yes, but it dulls the ancient recognition that everything has its season. Once upon a time, a plum in July was a miracle, not a year-round supermarket commodity. Quirky fact: in medieval Europe, winters were so harsh that entire rivers froze, and cities held fairs on the ice. People danced, gambled, roasted meat, and even staged horse races on frozen rivers. Winter wasn't just endured, it became spectacle. Imagine a carnival on your commute route, with jugglers and vendors set up where taxis usually honk. The cold forced slowness, and people turned it into celebration. Your own body is seasonal too. You have days of bloom, when energy bursts like spring. You have summers of activity, autumns of winding down, winters of retreat. To live effortlessly is to stop resisting those shifts. You wouldn't yell at a tree for dropping its leaves, why yell at yourself for needing rest? Here's the light joke. If humans had leaves, half of us would try to glue them back on with superglue instead of letting them fall naturally. That's how badly we resist change. Tonight, you can feel the rhythm in your breath. Inhale, exhale. Tiny seasons, repeating. You can feel it in the dark outside. Silence heavier than noon. And you can trust that tomorrow will rise without your help, just as spring always follows winter. No matter how impatient we get, the seasons remind you, rushing is absurd. Even cherry blossoms refuse to bloom a second earlier than they're ready. Life unfolds when it must, not when you demand. Imperfection's gentle charm, it hides in the cracks, the chips, the uneven lines that we usually try to hide. But tonight, as you lie there, the small flaws around you might feel like allies. The pillow isn't perfectly plumped, the blanket is bunched on one side, your thoughts aren't neat PowerPoint slides. And yet, this crookedness is oddly comforting. Nothing is forced into symmetry. It simply rests as it is. The Japanese have a word for this, wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. A cracked teacup isn't thrown away but cherished, because the crack makes it unique. Some are even repaired with gold lacquer, a practice called kintsugi. Instead of disguising the break, they highlight it. Imagine if people did that with their own lives, filling emotional scars with something that shines. Historians still argue whether this practice was practical repair or philosophy in action. But the golden seams have become a metaphor that refuses to fade. Your own imperfections carry the same shimmer. The stumble in conversation, the stain on your shirt, the moments you wish you could edit out. They're not proof of failure, they're proof of being human. To live effortlessly isn't to iron out the wrinkles, it's to let the wrinkles fold into the fabric. Here's a quirky fact. In medieval manuscripts, scribes sometimes made mistakes, misspelled words, wrong lines. Instead of rewriting the whole page, they doodle around the error, turning it into art. Some even drew tiny creatures pointing at the mistake, as if laughing at their own slip. These weren't failures, they were Easter eggs from history, proof that even monks got tired and playful. And here's your light joke for the night. If IKEA sold wabi-sabi furniture, half the shelves would arrive missing screws, and they'd call it enlightenment. So, as you drift, think of your own cracks. They don't need patching before you can rest. The chipped mug still holds tea, the crooked shelf still holds books, and you, imperfect as you are, still hold a heartbeat that refuses to give up. Effortless living isn't about perfection, it's about leaning into the charm of being unfinished. Tonight, you are allowed to be a cracked cup glowing quietly in the dark. Becoming the observer, this is where you step back, not out of indifference, but out of curiosity. You stop wrestling with your life like a wrestler in too tight shorts and start watching it like a slow play. There's relief in that shift. You're not always the actor, sometimes you're the audience. And the audience doesn't have to control the stage, it only has to watch. Ancient traditions love this idea. In Indian philosophy, they called it sakshi bhava, the witness attitude. Instead of identifying with every passing thought, you learn to sit behind your mind like someone watching clouds. Thoughts storm, rain, break apart, and you don't have to chase them. Taoists whispered something similar, the sage observes, without interfering. And the Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, often wrote as if watching himself from above, like a spectator at his own life. Historians still argue whether these similarities were coincidence or influence, but the pattern is clear. Wisdom prefers the balcony seat. Don't try it now. Watch yourself lying here. You're a character in a story, blanket pulled up, eyelids heavy, breathing steady. Your mind thinks it's in charge, but you, the deeper you are, simply watching. The observer doesn't panic about tomorrow. The Observer doesn't complain about today's awkward conversations. The observer just notices, "Ah, this too is happening." Here's a quirky historical aside. In some medieval mystery plays, actors wore masks, so the audience never forgot they were watching theatre. Life can feel like that. The arguments, the errands, the stress, their masks. Beneath them, you remain the watcher. And your small joke. If life were truly a play, half of us would be improvising badly, the director would be asleep, and the stage hands would still be arguing over lighting. But somehow, the show goes on. Observation is effortless because it doesn't require fixing. The rain falls whether you analyze it or not. Your heartbeat continues even when you stop checking your pulse. Tonight, becoming the observer means sinking back just enough to see your own thoughts drift by like lanterns on a dark river. They glow, they fade, and you don't need to follow. And the best part, the observer is never tired. Watching doesn't drain you, it restores you by noticing. Without grabbing, you let life pass softly, like a dream you don't need to control. Returning to stillness, everything has been moving toward this point, like waves rolling closer to shore, until they finally stretch thin and disappear into sand. You've floated with rivers, laughed with philosophers, wandered through gardens, carried shells like snails, listened to cities breathe, and sat with monks over bowls of rice. Now, all those images settle into a single truth. The art of effortless living is the art of stillness, not empty stillness, but full like a night sky brimming with stars that don't need to shout to be noticed. History has always circled back here. The Buddha, under his tree, found awakening not by running, but by sitting perfectly still. Lao Tzu left his wisdom in quiet lines and then vanished into the mountains. Seneca advised closing each day with a calm reflection, letting the mind cool before sleep. Historians still argue whether these stories are factual or embroidered, but the shape of the lesson is undeniable. Great minds sought stillness not as retreat, but as arrival. Your own body is echoing them right now. Your pulse is slower, your breath is shallower, your eyelids heavier. You're returning, not escaping. And isn't it funny? You spend your days racing, thinking arrival is in the next achievement, the next purchase, the next check mark. But tonight, arrival means letting go. Nothing left to chase. Here's a quirky fact. In the 17th century, sleeping chambers were not just bedrooms, but spaces for reflection. People sometimes wrote journals or prayed before closing their eyes, considering rest itself a sacred ritual. They weren't just collapsing into bed, they were rehearsing stillness. Even their architecture respected the pause. And here's your light joke before sleep. If modern life had a stillness app, it would come with push notifications, reminder, stop doing things now. Which, of course, defeats the point. So, you don't need the app. You only need this moment. No effort, no pushing, no rehearsing, just the weight of the blanket, the rhythm of your chest, and the silence between thoughts. Stillness isn't the absence of living. It's the proof that you've lived enough today. And now you return to the place all life secretly longs for, the gentle, wordless embrace of rest, and so, as this night's story exhales its last breath, the pace slows even further. Everything we touched, the rivers that taught us to flow, the Stoics who told us to love what arrives, the monks who savored rice one grain at a time, the laughter scribbled in margins, the snail trailing light across the pavement has led you here, not to a finish line, but to a soft landing. You've seen how effortless living is not about withdrawal from the world, but about moving with it, folding into its rhythms instead of tearing against them. You've felt how slowness isn't wasted time, but time finally noticed, how imperfections carry their own quiet charm, how observation relieves you from being entangled in every drama, and how rest itself is the oldest act of rebellion. Each lesson, each image, was a step down a dimly lit staircase, and now you've reached the bottom, where silence waits like an old friend. So take this stillness as your gift, Let your thoughts scatter like petals on water. Let your body sink as if the mattress itself were part of the earth pulling you close. Outside, the city may breathe, seasons may turn, rivers may keep flowing, but inside, you are free to stop. Nothing urgent presses on you now. Nothing demands dot, and if tomorrow greets you with noise, remember, you've learned the melody of quiet. You can carry it, like the snail's shell, into the busy streets. You can find it in mismatched socks, in laughter at clumsiness, in food eaten slowly, in naps unapologetically taken. For now, though, there is nothing left but rest. Slow down, lie heavy, let sleep arrive. Sweet dreams.